Greetings. Father Mark, continuing the series on the late medieval, early modern papacy, moving into the reign of Pope 202, Urban VI, reigned from 1378 to 1389. The conclave of 1378 was the first to take place in the city of Rome since 1303. Because of the intervening Avignon period, which we covered in previous videos. The death of Pope Gregory XI, so soon after returning the Holy See to Rome, which in itself followed the abandonment of Rome by his predecessor, Urban V, after actually returning, caused the populace of Rome to fear that another Frenchman, if elected pope, would simply return the Holy See back to Avignon and abandon Rome once more. There were 22 cardinals in the college at the time, but only 16 were present, physically present for the conclave, because 6 had found various excuses to remain in Avignon. With emotions already running high, the leading figures of Rome had little trouble in provoking a threatening mob to besiege the conclave, chanting for an Italian pope. At this point, the competing houses in Italy only wanted the Holy See back in Italy, regardless of who the pope turned out to be, because once reestablished in Italy, then they could vie among each other for control of the papacy, as they had to such malign effect prior to the Avignon period. So for the last time, so far, the conclave chose a man outside of itself, a man who was not a cardinal. They elected him as a compromise candidate. Baptized Bartolomeo Prignano, Prignano. He was born in Naples, southern Italy, in 1318. Therefore, it was thought that he would be acceptable to both the French and the Italians. Because he was ethnically Italian, he was born in Italy, yet, as we've seen, the Kingdom of Naples at the time was controlled by the French House d'Anjou. So he was actually, he had that, well, they wouldn't have said dual citizenship, but you get the point. He was of common birth. He had earned a reputation as an expert in canon law, both while working for the Curia in Avignon and after being named Archbishop of Bari. The election took place on April 8th, meaning he was elected on April because he wasn't there, so he didn't know on April 8th. So he was elected on April 8th, but it was not until April 18th that he could be personally reached to accept election. And he did accept. And he chose Bartolomeo. I mean, it's a saint's name, Bartholomew. So he could have been Pope Bartholomew, but he didn't. Did not keep his baptismal name. Instead, as he took the papal name Urban VI as Pope 202, he reigned for 10 years and 6 months. The first 4 months of his pontificate, from April 18th to August 2nd of 1378, are among the most difficult to reconstruct in the entire early modern period. It is known how it ended. On August 2nd, 1378, 12 of the cardinals, all of them French, announced publicly that the election of Urban had been made under duress, meaning under threat, and was therefore invalid. 7 weeks later, after Urban refused to step down, these French cardinals elected one of their own as pope. And this was none other than Cardinal Robert of Geneva, the guy who committed the atrocity at Cesena we covered in a previous video. They elected him on September 20th, 1378. Now, of course, this is not valid, so he is considered the 33rd of the so far 39 antipopes. He did take a papal name, but it's a name that a later real pope took, so I don't want to confuse things, so we'll just call him the antipope Robert or Robert. Ironically, or not, he was crowned, or there was a fake crown, but they went through a ritual of crowning him on Halloween Day, October 31st, 1378. Recall that during the reign of Pope Gregory XI, the previous pope, this same guy, Cardinal Robert, in command of mercenary free companies, had conducted a massacre of 4,000 civilians at Cesena that earned him the nickname the Butcher of Cesena. By electing such a man as a rival to the sitting Pope Urban VI, the French cardinals were making a clear stand. This guy, Robert, would never return the Holy See to Rome or anywhere in Italy, because he could never return, because he would be the object of thousands of vendetta. Besides, his mother was a cousin of the King of France, so he was obviously he was going to move the Holy See back to Avignon. Now, the election of an anti-pope was nothing new in church history. Obviously, he's the 33rd. Yet, because of the unique circumstances of the time, this proved to be the beginning of a schism, which is called the Great Schism, capitalized, which lasted for 39 years, from 1378 until 1417. In order to come to terms with what happened, we must first examine the first 4 months of Urban's pontificate, April 18th through August 2nd, 1378. In that time, there was no talk of a coerced election. However, that time was sufficient to demonstrate that Urban was not the kind of pope the cardinals wanted. When it was suggested that the Curia return to Avignon until the situation in Italy could be stabilized, Urban did not just refuse, which would not have been surprising, that early in his pontificate. But he did not just refuse. He flew into a rage. A frightening, emotional, like throwing things around, rage. And he threatened to double the size of the College of Cardinals. He said, I'll create 20 new cardinals, all of them Italian, to outvote the French, if you bring this up again, if you French bring this up again. Then whispers began circulating that Urban was mentally unbalanced, that his unexpected election triggered a derangement of his mind, and after all, he was not a member of the College of Cardinals. This idea gained momentum when Urban announced that he planned to simplify the lifestyle of the entire church and began divesting the church of its secular fiefs in order to free the church from dependence on secular government. Now, there's no doubt that Urban did have a temper, and that it wasn't a completely, far out of line for a person in his position. And he was not a person to tolerate contradiction. He was not he was not interested in what other people thought or what they said. Did not consider that anybody had any ideas that he was interested in. And he did not accept contradiction well. Yeah. Also, accusing him of being paranoid. Paranoia by a person in his position was not at all evidence of mental illness. One could argue that, considering how many previous popes within living memory had been assassinated or otherwise attacked or died before their time, one could argue that paranoia was if nothing else, evidence of profound mental sanity. And as a final point in his favor, St. Catherine of Siena not only recognized him as legitimate pope, but she left her home. She left Siena, traveled to Rome again, and publicly declared her support for his legitimacy. And that's why she died in Rome instead of Siena. She stayed there throughout all this. She stayed another 2 years in Rome trying to help him. And then she died there. She had a stroke, and she died on April 29th, 1380. Now, taking a broader view, the situation becomes less mysterious. Satan has continually attacked the church, manipulating the concupiscence of sinful souls to distract and to harm the church's mission. In 1378, Satan had all the weapons he needed already at hand. It was ethnic hatred. There was an atmosphere of violent anarchy, political rivalry, greed, ambition, and personal antipathy among some of these people involved. Added to that, the 7-decade residence of the papacy in Avignon meant that the bureaucratic governing apparatus already existed in France at Avignon. And there was a sizable population who would not only accept a return to Avignon, but would actively desire it. And there was some parts of the apparatus was still in Avignon who had no desire to leave. The residence of 7 legitimate popes in Avignon for 4 generations, depending on how you number generations, had done great harm to the church in terms of fostering a reputation for corruption, scandalous living, political entanglement, as well as limiting the church's independence. So this schism, this great schism, would entirely remove the papacy from European affairs, except as an object of ridicule and contention for another 2 generations. So looking chronologically forward to the Protestant movement, this schism provided a venue, a time period during which proposals of different ecclesiologies, which the church regarded as heretical ecclesiologies, could be ventilated, could be publicized. It would also enable enemies of the church to ridicule the claims of the papacy to be essential to the church. All they had to say was that the church endured for over a century without effective papal government. So how essential could it be? At the time of its beginning, meaning the beginning of this schism, the division of Europe into armed camps, owing to the 100 Years' War, remember that's still going on, meant that both claimants, both Urban VI, the real pope, the Roman pope, as well as Cardinal Robert of Geneva, who was a schismatic pope, was going to go back to Avignon, but both of them would have the support of secular monarchs, because whichever one monarch sided with, that monarch's his enemy is going to side with the other guy. So that enabled, and all of Europe is Catholic still at this point. So all the monarchs are Catholic, so they all have to take a side. And this enabled the schism to become more entrenched and therefore have more longevity and therefore more dangerous than previous creations of anti-popes. France, Naples, and Scotland sided with the anti-pope Robert of Geneva, while England, Germany, and the rest of Italy sided with Pope Urban, the Roman pope. Now, for a time, the rest of Europe remained neutral, hoping that this would just go away. But eventually, it went on for so long, everyone became involved. It took only 2 years for the first heretical ecclesiology to be proposed. The kings of France naturally supported the Avignon claimant, Cardinal Robert, because they wanted the Holy See to stay in France. And the secular academics at the University of Paris followed this policy. One of them, although he actually wasn't French, he was German-born, but he was studied, was an academic, trained and studied and taught at the University of Paris. His name was Conrad von Gelnhausen, Gelnhausen. lived from 1320 to 1390. He published Epistola Concordiae in 1380, a letter of concord. To prepare this work, he read, and in his text he revived, by publishing it, the political theology put forward by the Heresy Club that we covered earlier. They were all deceased by this point, but he found their writings and reformulated them. Dante, William of Ockham, Marsilius of Padua, that they formulated earlier in the century. This political theology, you recall, was one of the supremacy of the secular over the sacred, to the point that the secular, that because the church is dependent on the secular, is dependent on the state for protection, therefore the church owes the state obedience, which in itself is not heretical. However, this political theology went farther, indicating that dependence of the church on the state indicated supremacy of the state, to the extent that the state could interfere in the internal management of the church, even to the point of removing a pope. And that's when it went to the point of heresy. So Conrad, taking all of that, synthesizing it, and then giving his own, version, applied it to the situation of his day. With this, now you have two guys claiming to be pope, and he argued that the solution of this problem lay not within the church, but lay with the secular, because the secular is, so now the church is messing up, the church has got itself all confused. But he adopted the political theology that the state, the secular, is superior. So therefore, like a parent has to discipline the child, therefore the state would have to intervene and discipline the church. So he argued that the secular rulers of Europe had the authority by natural law and divine law to intervene to end the schism. And the method for doing this would be summoning a church council. A general council, he argued, consisting of the representatives of the people, the faithful, both secular and ecclesiastic, had the authority to judge which claimant was the rightful pope, and therefore correlatively the right to depose the other one. Or, if they deemed that both elections were invalid, to put both of them aside and simply elect and carry out an election, elect a legitimate pope in their place. Now, this argument was clearly in continuity with the two powers debate of the high medieval period, which we covered, and then was reformulated earlier in this century by the Heresy Club, William of Ockham, Dante, Marsilius of Padua. However, because it was represented in this context of when a schism was actually going on, when there were two guys claiming to be pope, it took on deeper significance, more immediate significance, so more people paid attention. So this treatise, this Letter of Concord, is considered the official beginning of the heresy of conciliarism, even though some of these ideas predate it. Remember, nothing just happens. Nothing just happens. This guy did not just produce this in 1380. That nothing just happens. Later that same year, the King of France, by this point it was Charles V, declared that he believed Robert of Geneva to be the true pope. However, he agreed. Instead, he agreed with Conrad von Gelnhausen that the best method to resolve this would be to summon an ecumenical council to decide the issue, because that would give moral certainty to the faithful of Christendom and then allow the church to move on. Now, Pope Urban VI died on October 15, 1389, after excommunicating Robert of Geneva. And Robert of Geneva, in turn, excommunicated Urban VI. So so the schism continued. He died with the schism still in effect. Urban would be followed as the 203rd legitimate in the Roman line Pope, Boniface IX. So we will, and Boniface IX will take us into the next century. reigned from 1389 to 1404. So we will stop here, and we will cover him in the next video. For now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.